I bring you words of welcome from Rabbi Asher Knight, who was asked to travel to Raleigh this evening with Adam Collette of the Jewish Federation of Greater Charlotte for a meeting with Governor Stein. Rabbi Knight very much wished to be here tonight, but also felt it was important to represent our community in that conversation. So I share these words on behalf of Rabbi Knight. Welcome and thank you for being here. We are deeply grateful for the extraordinary partnership that makes this evening possible. Our thanks go to Cantor Rudnitsky and Cantor Lissick, to Temple Bethel and Temple Israel, Jewish Family Services, the Jewish Federation of Greater Charlotte, the Foundation of Shalom Park and their security team, the North Carolina Holocaust Foundation, the Stan Greenspon Holocaust Education Center, Queens University, the Levine Jewish Community Center and the Butterfly Project, and the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. In a time when memory must be tended with care and shared responsibility, we are profoundly grateful to every partner who has helped make this gathering possible. When I, Rabbi Knight, first came to Charlotte, a member of Temple and a community leader that many here tonight remember, Susan Chernak-Spatz, took me to lunch. We went to Red Rocks. We sat down, our salads arrived, and she began to talk, quietly. She wanted me to understand her story, so I listened. She told me about Vienna, where she was born in 1922, about Berlin, where her family moved when she was 7, and where she watched Hitler rise, about Vienna again, and then Prague, and then the knock on the door in 1942, about her mother who chose to take a further transport east from Theresienstadt, not knowing what east meant. Her mother had never entered the camp. She went straight to the gas chambers. Susan survived Birkenau for 2 years. She survived typhus, scurvy, hepatitis, the daily selections, the sub-freezing death march west in January of 1945. She was rescued near a small German village when American soldiers from the 82nd Airborne arrived. She came to the United States on the 4th of July, 1946. She told me all of this over lunch at Red Rocks. And then she said something I have never forgotten. I had arrived in Charlotte carrying the weight of comparison with an incredible predecessor, Rabbi Schindler. People meant well, but the message was everywhere. You are following someone beloved, someone irreplaceable. Good luck filling those shoes. Susan looked at me and told me to set all of that down, not to try to replicate anyone, not to perform someone else's version of leadership or presence or rabbinate, that the only path forward was through my own authenticity, one day at a time. This was the leadership advice from a woman who had survived Auschwitz by living from 1 minute to the next. She was someone who understood that survival required being precisely and fully herself. As many of us know, after the war, she came to Charlotte and spent 30 years teaching and developing UNC Charlotte's Holocaust Studies program. Into her 90s, she kept sitting with students, kept telling her story, kept saying, "Ask me what you want to know, because you won't have many more chances to speak with someone who was there." Prisoner 34042, teacher, witness, advocate, inspiration, a woman who took the new rabbi to lunch and told him to be himself. This is what Yom HaShoah asks of us tonight. Not only grief, though grief is right. Not only memory, though memory is a moral obligation. Yom HaShoah asks us to understand what Susan taught at the deepest level, that erasure begins long before the gas chambers. It begins with contempt, with the slow, grinding work of deciding that certain people are less, are other, are not quite fully human. It begins with language before it becomes law. It becomes law and executive orders before it becomes increased violence. And by the time violence increases, too many people have already decided it is not their problem. That was a message Susan shared with me in 2016 as she was increasingly worried about the world we are living in. She didn't just live that sequence, she diagnosed it. She spent the rest of her life asking people to go back to the beginning of it, to learn to recognize contempt in its early form, to recognize the dangers of how contempt turns into laws and state actions, and how those actions normalize degradation of humanity. To remember the Shoah honestly is not to keep it behind glass. It is to ask what we are willing to see clearly: anti-Semitism when it begins to thicken in the air, rhetoric that makes cruelty sound reasonable, language that turns human beings into categories, and silence that pretends not to notice. It is to ask what kind of people we will be before the sequence completes itself. Not only what we will remember, but what remembering will ask of us. Jewish tradition has always known that survival is not passive. Susan survived Auschwitz on will, and then she survived the aftermath by turning her experience into testimony, into scholarship, into a classroom, into sage wisdom, into a lunch at Red Rocks with a new rabbi who needed to hear that his life was his own to live, and that each of us have a life to live every single day. Tonight, Cantor Rudnitsky and Cantor Lissick are going to carry us somewhere words alone cannot reach. There are griefs too deep for ordinary speech, truths that prose cannot fully hold. Their music will take us past information, past ceremony, past the part of ourselves that knows how to keep feelings at a distance. Their music will lead us into memory, into sorrow, into the stubborn refusal to disappear, which every survivor embodies every single day of their lives after liberation. Tonight, we remember the 6 million. Tonight, we honor the survivors and the memories of those we have loved and lost. Tonight, we remember heroes who liberated. Tonight, we refuse erasure. And in a world that still moves too quickly from contempt to cruelty, we say with our presence that Jewish memory is alive, that Jewish dignity is alive, and that the Jewish future will not be surrendered. May the memory of all those murdered in the Shoah be for a blessing. May we elevate the survivors and their messages to each of us. And may we prove worthy through how we live, how we stand, and how we refuse indifference.